All right, welcome in everyone, kicking off another deep dive here. And today we're going to be looking at something I think is really interesting, something that's super important to how businesses actually work, especially these days, with everything being so tech driven. And that is enterprise architecture.
Okay.
So, when you hear enterprise architecture, you might think, okay, servers, software, all that kind of stuff. But it's way bigger than that. It's about how does a business strategically use tech to hit those big goals, make that profit, actually, provide something of value.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. It's like the whole roadmap for how a business uses all its tech to get where it wants to go.
Exactly.
It's not just about getting the shiniest new gadget, right? It's making sure all those tech pieces actually work together to push the business forward.
Yeah. So to really dig into this, we had a chance to explore a conversation with someone who's been in IT for over 16 years, deep background in security, really knows his stuff. And now he's an enterprise architect at a major aerospace company.
Wow.
So went from hands-on technical roles all the way to the strategic level, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great point. That kind of trajectory, it just shows you enterprise architecture. This isn't something you walk into right out of school. You need that strong base. You got to know how IT works in the real world. And more than that, you need to get how tech really impacts what the business is doing.
Right. You got to see how the gears work before you can design the machine,
Got it.
Because today the IT world it's a jungle out there.
Right.
You've got systems that are on site, they're talking to cloud services, tons of different applications that kind of integrate seamlessly. It's crazy. And enterprise architecture, that's that framework that makes it all make sense.
Makes sense. It's think about how fast businesses are changing today.
Yeah.
It's constant. New tech, competition, it's intense. Without a solid vision, like an architectural vision, it can all fall apart. Inefficient, doesn't deliver what it's supposed to. It's like trying to build a house with no blueprints.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's get to the basics here. What exactly is enterprise architecture? The simplest way to explain it.
All right. So at its core, it's about creating that balance, aligning what IT can do with what the business actually needs to achieve. Making sure every dollar spent on tech is actually a strategic move that pushes those company goals forward.
There was a really cool analogy in the conversation we're looking at. If the business wants to fly, enterprise architecture, that's its wings.
Oh, yeah. That's good. It really captures that idea that, architecture isn't just some side thing. It's essential, right? It's what lets the business grow, change, reach its full potential.
Exactly, yeah. So going from that really hands-on tech role to enterprise architecture, that seems like a huge shift in how you think, right?
Huge. It's when you move into architecture, you're basically climbing up way high, right? You're going from the ground level, you're looking at the details, you're zooming out, you're at 10,000, 50,000 feet.
Oh, yeah.
You're not worried about the nuts and bolts of one specific piece of tech anymore. You're trying to figure out how everything works together.
Yeah.
All those systems, all those technologies, how do they connect? And then how do they all come together to actually help the business reach its goals, right?
Yeah. It's less about the specific commands and more about how those commands fit into that big picture and then how that big picture helps the business, right?
Exactly. And with that kind of higher level view, you got to really understand the business itself. What's driving it? What are the big goals? Who's the competition? What are the rules of the game? Regulations.
Yeah, it's you can't design a solution if you don't even know what the problem is, right? What the business is trying to do in the first place.
100%. Yeah, it's about translating those, business needs, which can be kind of vague, into concrete tech requirements, right? Got to make sure every IT project is aligned with where the company wants to go.
Makes sense. So let's break down those different domains or areas within enterprise architecture. I know there are 4 that are considered the kind of the foundation.
Right. So you've got your business architecture, your data architecture, application architecture, and then technology or infrastructure architecture. These are the pillars, right?
Yeah.
They help us understand all the different layers that make up a company's IT world.
And then security, that's not just its own separate domain, right? It's got to be part of all of them.
Exactly. And this is really important. Security can't be an afterthought. It's got to be built in, right? It's a thread that runs through every single part of the architecture. The business processes, how data is handled, how applications are built, what tech is used, all of it.
You're not just slapping security on at the end. It's got to be baked in from the beginning.
You got it. You're thinking about security at every step from, that initial idea for an app all the way to choosing and deploying new technologies, even defining how the business does things, those core processes.
Yeah. So let's quickly go over what each of these domains is about, starting with business architecture. What's that all about?
Okay, so business architecture is like the blueprint of the business itself. It's about defining what the business actually does. What are the core functions? What's the big strategy? What are the rules? The governance. And how do all the different parts of the business work together smoothly? It's basically understanding how the business creates value, delivers that value, and then captures it, right?
Okay. And then we got data architecture. What's that focused on?
Data architecture, that's all about the data, right? How's it structured? Where does it live? How does it change as it moves around the organization? And then how do we use that data to make smart decisions?
Yeah.
And that means designing good data models, managing how data is stored, setting up the processes for, data transformation and integration. And it's about making sure the right people have the right data at the right time to make good decisions.
Okay, so application architecture, what's that about?
So applications, right?
Yep.
Tons of them in any company. And application architecture looks at what each app does, how they all relate to each other, and how they work together to support those business processes we talked about. This is making sure those apps are efficient, they're reliable, they're secure, and they actually meet the needs of the people using them.
Makes sense. And finally, technology or infrastructure architecture, what's that one all about?
So this is the foundation, right? It's all the stuff that makes the IT world run. The hardware, the software platforms, the network that connects everything, the physical spaces where it all lives. It's about designing an infrastructure that's strong, it can grow, it's reliable, and it can handle the tech needs of the business now and in the future.
And as we said, security architecture, that's not a separate thing. It's woven through all of these.
Exactly. A security architect, they're not just thinking about firewalls and antivirus. They're thinking about how security impacts how the business does things, how sensitive data is protected, how applications are built securely, and how secure the underlying tech infrastructure is.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the specific role of a security architect within this big picture of enterprise architecture.
Yeah.
How do they typically work?
So security architects at this level, they're pretty strategic. They really understand how the business, the applications, and the tech infrastructure, how they all depend on each other. They're not just focused on the day-to-day security stuff, they're looking at the bigger picture.
Can you give us some examples of what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, for sure. So say there's a new business application being developed. A security architect, ideally they'd be involved right from the start, not just checking the code for security holes at the end, but actually helping define the security requirements from the very beginning, making sure security is built into the app's DNA.
Oh, okay.
Or let's say the company's looking at new technologies, the security architect would be there, figuring out, okay, how secure are these technologies? Can they be integrated into our existing systems securely? Stuff like that.
So it's about being proactive, not reactive, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all about collaboration. Security architects, they work closely with everyone, application owners, the tech teams, business stakeholders. They got to make sure everyone's on the same page with security and that all the decisions about security make sense for the business goals.
So for someone coming from a purely operational security background, that's got to be a pretty big shift in mindset.
Yeah, it is. It's about moving beyond the day-to-day tasks, and really understanding the why behind the security decisions. Like, okay, why is this data so important? What would happen if it was breached? How would that affect the company's reputation, the bottom line? Those are the kinds of questions security architects at this level are thinking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think a lot of our listeners are probably wondering, how do I become an architect, especially a security architect?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. It's not like you flip a switch and you're an architect. It's more of a journey, right? You develop the skills and experience to become an architect who's really focused on security.
So the first step is really learning how to think like an architect, right?
Exactly. It's about seeing that bigger picture, understanding what the business needs, and practicing how to apply those architectural principles in your work.
One thing that came up in the conversation we're looking at is that, some people think you can become an enterprise architect right out of college.
Yeah.
And that's not really true, right?
Not really, no. I mean, everyone starts somewhere, but enterprise architect, that usually takes a lot of experience in different IT areas. You need to know security, sure, but also software development, infrastructure management, probably other stuff too.
And that business sense we were talking about, that's crucial too.
Oh, absolutely. You got to know how the business works, who the competitors are, what the company sells, who the customers are, the whole market. And that kind of understanding, it usually comes with years of working in IT.
So it's about getting that experience across different areas, not just specializing in one thing, right?
Right, exactly. A security architect who only knows how to configure firewalls,
Mm.
they're going to have a hard time talking about how security affects the whole business. You got to understand how security works with the apps, the data, the infrastructure, everything.
So let's dive a little deeper into the skills and the mindset you need to be a great architect. It's obviously not just about technical knowledge, right?
No way. Mindset, that's probably even more important. Architects, they got to be the ones pushing for change, driving innovation, and taking smart risks when they need to. And they got to be curious, always learning new stuff.
And there's a leadership aspect to it, even if they don't have people reporting to them.
Oh, definitely. Architects are leaders.
Mm.
They influence others with their knowledge and their vision, even without having direct authority. They wear a lot of hats. Strategist, consultant, leader, sometimes even product owner or business architect, depending on what's going on.
Yeah.
They got to be able to explain their vision clearly and guide different teams to make it a reality.
So those soft skills, like communication, those are super important in these roles.
They're essential. An architect has to be able to explain complicated technical stuff in a way that everyone understands, from the engineers to the executives who might not be that tech savvy,
Hmm.
and they got to be able to adapt their language and how they present things depending on who they're talking to. And then there's critical thinking, being able to analyze information and make good decisions, even when things are complicated or unclear.
What about certifications like CISSP or cloud-specific ones? Are those still important for aspiring architects?
They definitely are. Certifications, there's like a stamp of approval, right? They show that you have a solid base of knowledge in key areas that give you credibility, show that you understand the important concepts and best practices, but they're just one piece of the puzzle. You still need that real-world experience and the right mindset to really be an architect.
So is there a typical career path for an architect? Like a general progression people usually follow?
Well, everyone's different, of course,
Mm.
but a common path starts with being a system architect, focusing on specific products or systems. From there, you might move up to a solution architect, working on bigger enterprise-level solutions. And then maybe you become an enterprise architect, working at the highest level, managing the whole portfolio and making sure tech is aligned with business strategy across the entire organization. But that's just a general guide.
Right. And as you move up, you got to keep learning, right? Expanding your knowledge to cover all those different domains we talked about.
Exactly. A security architect who wants to climb the ladder, they can't just focus on security. They got to learn about application development, infrastructure management, the business side of things. They need a holistic view, see how all those pieces connect and affect each other, especially from a security standpoint.
And within a company, there are different levels of architects, right? Based on experience and what they're responsible for.
Yeah, that's right. You've got your junior architects who are still learning, focused on specific tasks within a project. And then you have your senior architects, principal architects, even chief enterprise architects who have a much broader view and are involved in making big decisions for the whole organization.
So what does an architect actually do every day? What kinds of things do they work on?
Architects, they're involved in a lot of different projects across all the different domains, and they always bring that security focus with them. They might create reference architectures like outlining how to implement a zero-trust security model. They develop security strategies, tech roadmaps, all aligned with the organization's risk assessment and business goals.
So they're designers, they're strategists, but they're also advisors for other teams.
Right. They're like internal security consultants, explaining security policies, helping teams overcome security challenges, and encouraging everyone to follow good security practices. A big part of their job is also creating and maintaining documentation, like those reference architectures, white papers, vision decks, strategic plans, roadmaps, policies, all that stuff.
And I imagine all that information needs to be organized somehow, right? So everyone can access it.
Definitely. A lot of organizations use something called an architecture repository, which is basically a central system where all these documents are stored, and make sure everyone who needs the information can find it and that it's up to date. Keeping that documentation current is a big responsibility for the architecture team.
So being an architect in today's world, that's got to come with some challenges, right? What are some of the common hurdles they face?
One big one is this idea that security is just a cost. you know,
Yeah.
that it doesn't actually make the company money. Architects, they got to work hard to show the value of investing in security. It's not just about preventing breaches. It's about making sure the business can keep running smoothly and that people trust it.
Right.
It's tough to measure exactly how much money security saves, but it's super important to get buy-in from the business. Another challenge is balancing those security needs with the reality of the business. Sometimes they have old systems, legacy systems that aren't ideal for security. So you have to figure out how to make it work, even if it means making some compromises.
Okay, so let's say you're hiring junior architects. What are you looking for in a candidate? Besides the technical skills, of course.
Yeah, when we hire junior architects, we really focus on their understanding of business and their mindset. We might give them a scenario like, how would you make this business more secure if you had X amount of money and time? We want to see how they think strategically, how they approach problems from a business perspective.
And being able to work effectively within a large organization, that's got to be important too.
Absolutely. Understanding how the organization works, knowing how to get things done, even when there are roadblocks, having a positive attitude and a collaborative spirit, those are all really valuable. And being able to communicate effectively about security, even when it might be inconvenient or affect how users experience things, that's a key skill too. Basically, even at the junior level, we want to see that potential for big picture thinking.
Okay, let's talk about a real-world example to really illustrate these concepts. How about securing operational technology or OT environments, like in factories,
Yeah.
Industry 4.0, smart factories, all that?
Yeah, that's a great example. Securing OT environments, that's a whole different ballgame than traditional IT. You're dealing with machines that are often older, specialized, and they have their own priorities and limitations.
So the usual IT security solutions, they might not work in OT or even be safe to use.
Exactly. A lot of OT systems, they have limited processing power, they run on old operating systems, and they weren't designed with security in mind. If you try to use traditional IT security tools on them, like vulnerability scanners, you could disrupt the manufacturing process or even damage the equipment.
So what's the enterprise architect's role in securing these OT environments?
They're the bridge between the two worlds. They need to understand how the factory works, talk to OT security vendors who specialize in these kinds of environments, and run tests to find solutions that are both effective and safe for the equipment. They often work with vendors who provide tools that can monitor and secure industrial control systems without being too intrusive.
And applying those IT security frameworks to OT, that can be tough too, right?
Definitely. Frameworks like NIST 800-171, they were made for IT systems, not those legacy OT systems. So the enterprise architect has to figure out how to adapt those frameworks, do risk assessments that consider the unique aspects of OT, come up with segmentation strategies, and work with both the business people and the operations teams to understand the limitations of the older systems and find alternative security controls.
So it's a very collaborative process and you have to be flexible, right?
Oh, absolutely. The big goal might be to have a fully connected, data-driven factory to make things more efficient. And the security architect, their job is to make sure that transformation happens securely. They develop roadmaps, guide the implementation of security measures, all that.
So to wrap things up, it's clear that the enterprise architect, they play a huge role in today's businesses.
No doubt about it. It's a really unique role that combines technical expertise, business knowledge, and strategic thinking. It's about seeing the big picture, knowing how technology can help the organization reach its goals, and making sure everything is secure and resilient in the long run.
And becoming a successful architect, it's a journey, right? It's about constantly learning, getting diverse experience, and developing that architectural mindset.
Exactly. You got to be committed to growing professionally, seeking out new experiences, and understanding the business context of everything you do with technology.
This has been really insightful for anyone in IT or anyone who wants to move into a more strategic role. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Tech Unplugged podcast by Sublime Techie.